Time Story Time. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Truergy, also known as Byron Sidious. I'm not at my usual spot here at break time at work. I'm once again in the van. You may hear the pattering overhead and see it on the windows. It's raining here, so my usual outdoor location is not viable. And the prior spot that I thought I'd been able to establish as a backup, well, it's no longer available. It apparently had never been available in the first place because it's a secondary access for the banquet kitchen. And now that they've got adequate staff, when they have events, they need to have those steps and that area clear of any personnel or anything else. So I have to stay clear of that. That's all right, though, because at least here I am dry, I'm not being bothered, and I'm not causing a bother to anyone else who might want to pass through the area or need to pass through the area. I'm not near the back shipping dock area, so I'm not in anyone's way. I'm not mucking anything up. Earlier today, I had started to do a kind of an impromptu show at home that got interrupted because my wife gave me a call letting me know she was coming home from work early, and I wanted to spend some time with her, so I just kind of cut and bailed, cut and run. But thankfully, I imagine the folks who are familiar enough with me understand that my family comes before anything I'm doing here. So I know it's not great to just cut and run like that without much warning or heads up, especially when I don't have much of an audience. So you might think, oh, well, then it's even more forgivable. Fair do, could be, yes, by some perspectives. Other perspectives might very well look at it as, well, hey, you don't command much of an audience, Josh. You don't want to lose the ones you've got, do you? I'd rather lose the audience online than not spend time with my wife. So it was a pretty easy choice to make. Here at work, though, I'm at work, and it's my break time. So here I am. I find a workaround. So we are going to continue with the presentation of The Pen is Not Mightier, an Amelia City Story, as written and read by yours truly. Sorry about the drink pause. To whet the old whistle. Take the glasses off so I can see better. I'm nearsighted. I only really need the glasses to see further than like 4 feet in front of my face. The nearsightedness is pretty bad, but if I try to wear my glasses while I'm reading, I get a little bit of a headache, so I take them off so I can read. So there's a lot of times when I'm at home where I don't have my glasses on. Picking up where we last left off. My boss is going to be pretty pissed with you, Detective Bush said, as he brought Carla a cup of coffee from his tiny studio apartment's kitchen area. She nodded, opting for humility given his aggravated tone. He sat down on his couch kitty-corner to her, the recliner his only other seating. She wasn't sure why, but she suspected he slept in the chair she occupied rather than on the couch. Given its direct angle to his television, this seemed logical. I didn't give him a name, at least, she offered. I wondered about that. Any reason you didn't? I thought all you reporters loved getting involved that way. It's not my place to do that, she replied honestly. I just report the information I get. That actually is part of why I'm here, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. How hard is it to stab through a human skull? Jesus, Bush said with a sigh. He rubbed the back of his head and drank off half of his own mug, setting it down on the small coffee table before him. Well, where our guy has been doing it pretty hard. An inch lower, and he'd have a much easier time of it. Bush turned his head, pointing to the part of his skull where the bone protruded out just a little, just above the brainstem. This is where he's hitting him. He's strong, whoever he is. Carla took out her notepad from her purse and jotted down, physically strong. You okay with me taking some of this down? Can't hurt at this point, he replied with a shrug. Another oddity. Whatever kind of weapon he's using, it's really durable. What do you mean? Carla asked. Well, most normal knives scrape bone. They leave shavings in the wounds. Tips break off. This guy, though, his knife, or whatever it is that he uses, doesn't do either of those things. He takes care of it. It's essential to the killing ritual. Whoever he is, he's more attached to that weapon than he is to his victims. Carla jotted down another verbatim this last sentence, as it struck her as peculiar. Don't a lot of serial killers use the same weapon over and over again? Yeah, they do, but most psychos with blades have to replace them. Occasionally, they upgrade to bigger versions, sometimes going from straight blades to serrated. This guy, though, no change at all. Carla thought over everything she knew about law enforcement procedure, formulating her next question. Is there anything at all that connects these victims? Well, none of them knew each other personally, but, he said, hesitating. You have a personal hunch? She asked. Yeah, I'm not the lead on this thing, thank God, but I've been keeping close tabs on it. These victims, they do all have one thing in common. Carla waited, pen poised over her pad. All of them have been plaintiffs in civil suits sometime in the last few years. They got huge settlements for all of them. 4 of them didn't even have jobs when they were killed. They've just been living off of their lawsuit money. I've got a window open and just toss that out. It's easier. You mean to tell me your lead guy hasn't picked up on this? Your lead detective? Is he dense? No, he's not dense. He's just he's not looking in the right direction, Bush said offhandedly, as if such mistakes were common. I'm going to be going over the records from those cases tomorrow. If you want to be helpful, you can come with. Maybe comb through the papers with me, he said with a smile. Sure thing, Carla said, earning a double take from the detective. Yeah, I'm being serious. This story could be something really big for me. So if I need to do a little footwork, I'm game. Bush raised his mug to her in a toast, and they lapsed into more casual conversation until she decided to leave an hour later. Driving away from his building, she never spotted the narrow figure watching Bush's apartment window from across the street. Damnation, the stranger named Roderick grumbled as he stared up at the detective's window. He slid backward into the alley, keeping just a sliver of the window in view. He sensed a connection to the detective, a similarity of mindset he had not felt toward a human very often. Stephen Bush felt the same drive, the same restlessness and relentlessness as the stranger, though their ultimate aims were oppositional. The strangers existed to destroy the minds and bodies of humanity. Bush existed to protect them. Normally, Roderick might have gone up to the detective's apartment and eliminated him straight away. This isn't normally, though, the stranger said aloud. He stalked away down the alley, slipping into the quieter streets of Amelia City. In the 5 days since speaking to Bush at his apartment, Carla heard about 3 more stabbings downtown. Only one was unexplained and in the back of the head, though, and a brief look into the victim's background told her that the slain man had recently sued his former employers for wrongful termination and won an enormous settlement. Bush was on the right track in victimology. She called him and told him what she had found out, for which he thanked her immensely. A day later, he sent her to the courthouse downtown, where she presently sat going through a box of recent case filings for public record civil suits that had no non-disclosure agreements. When she reached the 17th file, she fetched a sigh, leaning back in the uncomfortable wooden chair the records clerk had brought into the room for her. The room itself was just a storage closet, really, several columns of boxes standing to her left. On her right were 2 boxes she had already rifled through, cases where settlements had seemed fairly reasonable. She weeded those out, as this killer seemed to be targeting only those people who were, for lack of a better term, greedy. She cracked her neck, looking down into the box she was currently working on. She scooped up the next file and felt a wave of relief wash over her as she recognized one of the recent victims. The next file was another victim, as were 5 more. None had been filing suit against the same defendant, and none of them shared attorneys, so the connection ended at where they had come to have their hearings. "Have you been watching this courthouse?" she asked softly. "Are you in the public viewing gallery?" Carl went through 2 more boxes, but found no more of the victims therein, spending nearly an hour on each box, carefully sifting through all of the information available. These were small victories, she thought, as she made copies of the files that she had picked out in a nearby workroom. When she was finished for the day, she checked in with the records clerk and informed her that she would be back the next day to continue this line of work. When Carla pulled out into her space in the parking lot adjacent to her apartment building, she paused for a moment after shutting off the engine, just listening to the crackle of the engine cooling under the hood. It was getting dark out, the sun on its descent, lending the city's north side neighborhoods a phantasmal twilight shimmer, a subtle visual promise of much deeper darkness to come. No large metro was ever entirely safe after dark, and Amelia City led the pack in terms of things that went bump in the night. Carla enjoyed the look of the area for another minute, then got out of the car with her tote bag of files, heading for the rear entrance of her building. Home for the indie journalist was a cracker box on the 5th floor of a 10-story apartment building that had been built shortly after the Second World War. When she pressed through the back door into the entrance lobby, a mixture of molded carpeting and dust scents welcomed her, by now a familiar mix that she labeled home stretch in her heart. As she passed through the mostly empty, echoing entryway on her way to the elevator, she noticed the lights flickering back and forth, dimming and brightening randomly. "Just another job the super isn't doing," she said to herself, hitting the call button and waiting for the elevator. When the doors slid open, she paused. The only lights she could see were the dim glow of the floor buttons, and there seemed to be a faint stench of something rotten wafting out from within. She considered using the stairwell instead, but as the doors began to shut, she stuck out an arm, which tripped a sensor to pull them open again, and slid inside. She pressed 5 and stepped to the back of the car. As it began its ascent, the overhead lights popped back on, and she let out a sigh of relief. It would be the only relief that she would feel all night. The stranger named Roderick narrowed his eyes at the flickering light fixtures in the lobby, stepping out of the pool of shadows in one corner opposite the main entrance. He had been in Carla's apartment only 10 minutes earlier, looking for some reason to justify bringing the woman to an end. He had come away empty, though, finding no cause to target her during the course of his present assignment. She fits none of my current target parameters, and she isn't directly interfering, he thought. I do not possess the freedom of the others to simply do as I will. I am not yet trusted with that degree of freedom. He couldn't understand why, but he would normally be spending this time trying to find an end run around his restrictions. Instead, the stranger found himself observing her, learning everything he could about the human woman and her career. Something deep within himself felt drawn to this woman, a sense of kinship. He couldn't accurately recall how long he had been a stranger, largely due to the bizarre nature that seemed to be in and of themselves, the way they seemed to slip in and out of place when they were in the compound that his kind called home. Yet he knew it had been long enough that he should feel a stronger bond to his fellow otherlings than he did. The stranger named Roderick, he of the blade, simply did not belong. Going through a shelf of old vinyl record albums in the journalist woman's spare room, he had felt a connectedness to the human world that surprised him. He knew many of the bands in her collection, even recalled enjoying their music on his own personal computer when he had been human himself. He sensed when Carla was getting close to the building and slipped back down to the lobby, waiting until she was on the elevator to come out of the shadows. There's something about you, woman, he thought as he crept into a public men's room in the building's lobby. He walked over to the dingy, poorly lit sink, grasped both sides of the mirror, and leapt through it. The first thing Carla noticed when she stepped through the door was the deep chill in the entryway, as though her air conditioner had been cranked on full blast and aimed right at the front door. Yet she had a standing policy of keeping the unit off when she wasn't at home, and she didn't hear the telltale metallic ticking of the unit's grate adjusting back to normal. She flipped on the entryway lights and rolled her eyes as they flickered just as the ones in the lobby had. Setting her keys on a small glass bowl on a lamp table just a few feet inside, she shuffled out of her flats and headed down the short hallway into the living room. Stepping through the entryway, Carla curled her nose up and snorted out loudly, detecting a hint of something foul in the air, just as she had in the elevator. Someone's been in here, she thought, her shoulders hunching up and her nerves alight. Carla set her purse down on the recliner across from her television and swiftly made her way to the kitchen, taking out a large blade from a wooden cutlery block. She would not stand around as some timid doe. No. She swept out into the living room with the knife held out in one hand, her other hand gripping her cell phone with the flashlight turned on. After checking the living room, Carla moved down to a second narrow hall to the bedroom. But once more, she found nothing obvious, no lurking predator. Just a twin bed and a cheap dresser, same as always. Even her closet held no monsters this evening. A cursory look in the bathroom gave no more chills than an average water closet. Yet from the corner of her eye, she thought she caught a glimpse of something, a movement. Reaching through the doorway, she turned on the bathroom light. She shrieked at the sight of a dim silhouette in the mirror, a tall, lean figure behind her in the hallway. She spun and swept the knife outward, but her weapon hit nothing but clean air. Panting, her brow becoming damp with cold sweat, she cast her cell phone light about once more, but found no intruder. A panicky second glance at the mirror revealed nothing of the figure that she thought she had seen, not even a hint. Her breath misted out of her mouth. Stunned at the dramatic drop in temperature, she backed herself into her living room, taking a quick look over at the thermostat. Her heat was set at a moderate 70 degrees, but the current reading showed that the inside of her apartment was 40 degrees. How the fuck, she muttered to herself, sidestepping over and turning the heat up as far as she could. Clang, clang. And just when she had managed to return her breathing to a regular rhythm, the sound of those spurs echoing down the hall set off every human alarm inside of her mind and body. "Who's there?" she called out, setting herself into a ready stance, angling herself so that her back was to a corner of the room. She had no training in hand-to-hand combat, but she had friends who had served in the military. All of them had recommended this tactic in a one-on-one situation wherein she couldn't see her opponent. If you couldn't see them, they could not yet see you, did not apply. The wisdom was, get your back to a corner. Her question received no verbal answer, but once again, there came the sound. Clang, clang. More distant now, as if receding. She listened to those cowboy boots walking away for another full minute before she finally stormed down the hallway, knife held out, teeth bared. If some lunatic was going to try and snuff her out, she wasn't going to make it fun or easy for him. Yet once more, her search for an enemy in the bedroom bore no fruit. Trembling from adrenal exhaustion, she headed to the bathroom and dropped her knife, hands coming up over her mouth. Scrawled in some kind of blue paint or ink on her bathroom mirror was a strange symbol, one she had seen a few times around the city. It was a set of 4 hooked blue claws, joined along their rounded tops by a single black line. Underneath this symbol, her intruder had scrawled the words, "Follow me." Carla slammed the bathroom door shut, pelted to her bedroom, and huddled in the corner with the kitchen knife clutched tight in her hands. She remained there until fatigue stole her off into the land of slumber. And that's where we will leave off for tonight. For this installment of The Pen is Not Mightier. I have myself a quick smoke. Roderick, he of the blade, does not feel quite like he fits in with his fellow strangers. The others, he feels, are more adept at being what they are, for now. But what could this mean for him and his kind later on? Who knows? I have not yet been down that particular road through Amelia. Oop, sorry to turn that off. Whoa, that shows up a lot differently. Woohoo! Huh. All right, that looks very strange compared to how it looked when I was toying around with this earlier today on my home laptop. Yeah, kind of, Lucian. Lucian Labra says, just sounds like what it's like being the new guy. Could very well be. Could very well be that, because when I wrote this story back then, at the time, I had it set up that Roderick was the newest, the youngest of the strangers. He's not anymore. 2 new strangers have joined the ranks in stories that came along later on. And one technically came later, but there's, I don't know how exactly to explain. Time is not perfectly structured in and around Amelia. Oftentimes it's in my mind, it's in my head that time is, as a concept, a beautiful thing. The idea of causation, cause and effect, the idea that you can't go back and undo something, the idea that whatever happened before is done and done. But is that necessarily so? If something were changed, would we be aware of it? Or would we imagine that the alterations that we now experience are just the way things have always been? Who can say? Thankfully, I don't get into a whole hell of a lot of diving into quantum mechanics or any of that nonsense because I'd prefer to do the much more entertaining thing and just say, we don't know. I don't know. You don't know. And no, there is no explanation coming. As Lord Quoth might say, explanations? Do you really think you're going to get one here? No, 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 my friend. That sort of thing is reserved for people who are logical, people who deserve to have reason and rhyme in their existence. Not so much for us. Oh, yes, Lucian. Yes, precisely. Much more, Lucian says. So fantasy rather than sci-fi. I've always been much more inclined towards fantasy than science fiction. Fantasy, after all, was my very first genre as a storyteller. Even my horror stories, my Amelia City tales, rely more on the horror technique of inexplicableness, the fantastical and phantasmagorical, rather than the hardline scientific and exploratory. There's not so much experiment as it's not so much experimentation of hard scientific method as dabbling with alchemical philosophy and theory, hypothesis that suits my particular train of thought a lot better. As I said, there is a particular bird fellow who would point out this storyteller is not necessarily dealing or playing with a full deck. Ironic, given that I work in a casino. I have access to plenty of decks. I'm not a blackjack dealer, though. I'm just the janitor. Could you imagine? I couldn't. I'm not good at gambling or much of any card games. But anyhow, I am going to have to get back inside soon. So, Lucian, if you have any final questions for me before I get going, I say Lucian because you're the only person I think currently in the show who's watching me live right now. I know I did have a couple of other viewers at one point or another, but it'll be in the archive later on for folks to catch up on if they so choose. But did you have any questions for me, Lucian, before I get going? I should turn my radio back on, actually. Double check if I missed any calls while I was out here. There we go. If not, that's perfectly all right. Gonna go ahead and head off, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Oh, wait. Popping in. Got anything? No. Got anything. Just wish you and the fam a happy Halloween. Well, thank you, Lucian. And thank you, and a happy Halloween to you as well, if I do not see or hear from you before Samhain, before the day of All Saints Eve, or All Hallows Eve, rather. But I will be back again tomorrow night here on the Break Time Story Time to continue the presentation of The Pen is Not Mightier, Amelia City Story. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.